Thanks for coming. My name is Gerald Knaus. I'm the director of a European NGO, a think tank in Berlin. I will say something about what we do to put in context what I'm going to present to you. We'll have a few people come later, but let's not wait more. It might be that then in the debate I'll have to repeat some things. Now, what I would like to talk to you about is a historic opportunity in response to a historic tragedy that would enable the Gambia and Germany in particular, one country in West Africa and one country in the European Union, to transform the debate about how to deal with irregular migration. To do many of the things that policy makers in Europe and at various summits with African leaders have talked about but never did, which is how to replace irregular migration with regular migration and how to create partnership agreements that actually work. Now, to introduce ourselves, we are a non-profit NGO, we're not consultants, we don't work for the German government, but we've been advocating for policy change now for 20 years. One of our biggest campaigns in Europe that was successful was to lift the visa requirement for countries in the Balkans and in Eastern Europe. So 70 million people who needed a visa to travel to Europe a few decades, 15 years ago, can now travel visa-free to the European Union. And in order to make this campaign, we reached out to ministries of interior around Europe. And we established a reputation that the proposals we make try to create more mobility, borders which are easier to cross, but at the same time can convince ministries of interior. I've spent 5 years in Paris, 7 years in Turkey. I now live in Berlin. And these are some of our core targets when we try to persuade policymakers in the European Union, in Germany, but also in the neighbors of Europe. One of our most visible successes has been what became the EU-Turkey statement in 2016. We wrote a report in September 2015 how Germany and Turkey together can resolve and deal with irregular migration in a way that is compatible with the International Convention on Human Rights and the Refugee Convention. This paper was picked up by the Germans. German Chancellor Angela Merkel started quoting it. By the Dutch, they had the EU presidency, but most importantly by the Turks. And so on 7th of March, the Turkish Prime Minister in this picture on that day in that room proposed our plan to the German Chancellor as a way of cooperation with Turkey. Now, this actually created a lot of headlines, there was a lot of news. We became very well known in Europe as a result. But the most important lesson often was missed. For cooperation to work for the European Union, the partner countries must have an interest in what is being discussed. In this case, it was Turkey that proposed the idea. That's why it worked. And one result was that a lot less people crossed the sea, a lot less people died, and the single biggest amount of money in the history of the European Union for refugees outside of Europe, 6 billion euros, was given for Syrian refugees in Turkey. Now, I leave the details, but this is just as background where we became quite well known around Europe to those who didn't know our work on visa before. And in recent weeks, I've been traveling around Europe a lot. This is a picture with the Spanish foreign minister who I met 3 times this year, at his invitation coming to Madrid. He is now the foreign minister of the European Union since a few weeks, Josep Borrell, to discuss migration. And what I'm going to present to you now, we've been presenting in many, many meetings around Europe to governments, parliaments, ministers, and the media. And the tragedy that we want to address with this proposal starts here in the Mediterranean, which has become the deadliest border in the world, as you all know. In 2013, this picture shocked the world when 366 people drowned between North Africa and Lampedusa, the island. But unfortunately, the reaction to this tragedy, and there were many others, did not lead to a policy that worked. In 2016, 181,000 people crossed from North Africa to Italy, and more than 4,500 drowned. Most of the people who crossed that year were from West Africa, from 6 countries in West Africa. The largest group from Nigeria, I think the 3rd largest group from the Gambia. So I'm sure a lot of Gambians know some of these 4,500 people who drowned. In fact, in 4 years you had more than 17,500 deaths in the Mediterranean in 4 years. This is like a war. Now, in response to this crisis, European leaders tried to stop migration by any means possible. And one of the things they did was to reach out to the Libyan Coast Guard and militias in Libya. So now the Libyans started stopping people, taking them back to Libya. And as we all know, and as again you know better because I've met many people here who've been in those detention centers. People were taken to detention centers in Libya where there was torture, rape, abuse, murder. But the Europeans, driven to somehow stop migration, went even further. We had an Italian Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Interior, Matteo Salvini, who had taken over a party that stood at 4% in the opinion polls in 2013. And he led it to 36% in elections to the European Parliament this year. He's now the most popular politician in Italy. And his campaign was, stop migration at any cost. This is a tweet he sent out a few days after he became the Deputy Prime Minister. And his message was, stop all rescues, chiudiamo I porti, we close the ports. Now, the trouble about these policies, which were cooperating with torturers, risking loss of life that could be saved, and sending the message to Europeans that anything needed to be done to stop migration, was that the numbers started to fall rapidly. So in the eyes of many Italians, these policies worked. This year, only 11,000 people crossed from North Africa to Europe. And if you look at the picture of how many people crossed in the last 2 decades, what you see is that there were 4 exceptional years. Most years, very, very few people from Africa come irregularly to Europe. This is the average. 25,000 a year on average. This is from North Africa to Italy. And in those 4 years, it was 650,000. And then it dropped again to the average. So this mass migration lasted exactly 3.5 years. But this period was, of course, a tragedy for no nation as much as for the Gambia. Because no nation had as many a share of its population on that trip as the Gambia. 2% of your population traveled in those 4 years across to Europe. And the estimate is that at least 1,000 people drowned at sea. So this was the tragedy. In a way, we could say it's historic, but it has left deep scars. And it raises a big political issue in Europe. Can we find ways without working with Libyans who torture people? Can those who in Europe want to defend human rights say there is a way to stop irregular migration that is humane? And what partnership do we need with countries of origin? But the crisis, this was the tragedy, the crisis continues. This is a reception center in Germany today, where you see people whose lives is at hold. They don't know what to do. Take the Gambians who crossed to Europe in those exceptional years. Of those 40,000, 15,000 are today in Germany. They are in places like this. This is a reception center where they are waiting. Their asylum application is almost certain to be rejected. Then they will be told you have to leave. But they will not go back. They've invested too much. They've risked too much. They've survived. Their families have saved money. They are supposed to make a success of this. They've come and risked their life to improve their lives and that of their families. So they are staying there. But because they don't have legal status, they are not allowed, or very few of them are able to integrate. They are not allowed to have a language course. If you don't speak German, you can't really work. They don't get a work permit. They are being told, you should leave. They don't leave. They stay. They are traumatized from the past, but they don't have a future at the moment. Most of them are in one part of Germany, the state of Baden-Württemberg, which has 11 million people. It's one of the richest parts in the world. That's where the car was invented. That's where Mercedes-Benz comes from, Daimler. It's very rich, it has 2% unemployment, so basically full employment. By coincidence, most Gambians were sent there. But they are in places like this. Another reception center I visited 3 weeks ago. It's a former sports hall. There are 100 people in there. All of them from Africa, 40 of them are Gambians. I talk to them, their life looks like this. They go to bed at night in fear of being woken up by the police to be deported. They don't really have a job to look forward to. They wait. But what can they do? The deportations from this center, and I talked to one young Gambian who'd been deported 3 times to Italy. Because the deportations don't take place to the Gambia, they are so-called transfers from one European country to another. Last year, Germany transferred 2,800 people to Italy. But we have no borders in Europe, so there are no border controls. So these people then come back a few weeks later with the bus to Germany. This young Gambian was deported 3 times, but he was back in Germany. This creates an atmosphere of fear. There's no hope, and there are thousands of Gambians who've risked everything and are now in this position. In Germany, and again, a similar number in Italy and a similar number in Spain. This is a crazy situation. Something needs to be done. Now, the German idea, and the idea of many European countries is those who have no right to stay should be returned. And this has become the dominant issue in diplomacy between the Gambia and Germany. You know, Germans say we've taken 1 million refugees, but these are not refugees, they should go home. And so the idea in Germany is that somehow you can deport people by force. But it's crazy. It won't work. It's impossible. Look at the numbers to begin with. Germany last year, the whole of Germany deported 21,000 people. These are people who were taken on planes to be taken to their home country. But 76% of them were taken to European countries. 8% to North Africa. The deportations to the whole rest of the world were 3,400. That's the whole rest of the world. And to African countries, these were the numbers. 193 to Nigeria, 144 to the Gambia, 16 to Senegal, 5 to Togo. I was invited to a presentation by the leader of Germany's governing party, the CDU. And I said there, even if Germany would deport 144 people every year, if you have 15,000 people, do the math. 80 years? It's crazy. It will not work. But of course, this year Germany deported, since February, 1 person to the Gambia. 1. I think came voluntarily. So there's a moratorium. It stopped completely. This policy doesn't work. And what I've been trying to say with my colleagues in the last year is that you need to understand the interest of the country of origin. The idea that thousands of people will be deported is such a threat to hundreds of thousands of relatives who live here, who've invested so much hope, that no government in the Gambia will be able to agree to that. Also, Gambia would be the only country in Africa that does it. So it's not realistic. So early this year, I had a meeting with those 2 politicians. They are the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg. This is very important. In Germany, it's the federal states that are in fact responsible for integration and deportations. The Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg is from the Green Party. The Deputy Prime Minister is from Angela Merkel's party. And talking to them about the issues, I suggested a plan, which was this, the Gambia plan, as we call it in Germany. Here it's better to call it the Germany plan, because everything here is a Gambia plan. And the idea is to say, let's be realistic. If most Gambians will stay in Germany, Germany has no choice, but has an interest to offer them the chance to work. So Germany should work on legal stay for all Gambians except those who've been convicted of serious crimes, which is a very small minority. People should be allowed to register, be allowed to learn the language, be allowed to work. In addition, in return for the Gambian government discouraging further future irregular arrivals, Germany should offer 2 things immediately. Priority assistance, so the Gambia should become one of the top priority countries for German development aid. and legal migration possibilities. Now, by legal migration possibilities, and I've discussed it just now in your parliament with the Foreign Affairs Committee, at the moment 20 Gambians have official German scholarships, which are given by the Foreign Ministry, the DAAD. The small country of Gabon, which has 2 million people, has more than 200 scholarships. Why not, now that Gambia is important for Germany, increase the number of Gambians who can actually study German, who can study in Germany, who create a link? Actually, the moment you give up on the idea, which is a fantasy, that thousands of people will be returned, you realize that one of the most important Gambian diasporas for the next generations will be in Germany. You realize that this can be a bridge between two countries. And then you realize that it's crazy that there are no certified German teachers here. You need a Goethe Institute, a cultural institute in the Gambia where people can study German. You actually need a stronger diplomatic presence. You need options for legal migration. Now, if all of this sounds like a fantasy, it's not. As I've presented this plan, of course, first we talk to the people most concerned, Gambians in the Gambia and in Germany. And we are telling stories like these. I met these two Gambians who are now working in a restaurant in Germany. They arrived across via Libya, via the sea. They managed to get permission to work. They are still insecure about the long term, but for the moment they can work. They are learning German. The employer of that restaurant, it's on the border of Germany, Switzerland, on the Rhine, says she couldn't keep her restaurant open without them. As I said, 2% unemployment. There is a shortage of labor. All over southern Germany, people are looking for people to work. But in order to work, you need to risk identifying yourself, and then you risk being deported. So it's a catch-22. Or another Gambian working as a caretaker. There's a huge demand in Germany. Germany is sending schools to train nurses. It's thinking of setting up such schools in the Balkans, in Morocco. Actually, if you want to work in Germany now, a new law has been passed that allows you to work if you have the qualification, but you need to know German and you need to have the right qualification. Nobody in Gambia can get this qualification here, but if Germany would open some schools here, you would have legal possibilities. Now this I've discussed with MPs, members of parliament, of the governing party. We need moral realism. Sea rescues, of course, must continue, but alone they will not stop lives being lost. Return realism means that there will be some returns of those who commit crimes, because even Gambia, as I talk to politicians here, agree that that should be the message. You know, if you've given the chance to work and make a contribution, use it. But there need to be credible offers to countries of origin in return for controlling future irregular migration. Legal migration, scholarship, and if you have a refugee problem, which is not true in the Gambia, resettlement of refugees, like with Turkey. We need to address false fears. There has never been a mass migration of Africans to Europe. In fact, there is less legal migration now than there was 15 years ago. You know that there was a time when Gambians could travel without a visa to Europe, in the early 90s still. The amount of scholarships, the amount of residence permits given to people from sub-Saharan Africa are lower now than in 2008. This trend should be reversed. If it helps stopping people crossing via Libya or via the boats to the Canary Islands and the sea. Where Europe went wrong in the last few years is here. After the big accident in 2013, the European Commissioner from Sweden, Cecilia Malmström, went to Lampedusa and she said this: we need partnership with countries of origin and we need more legal migration. But this never happened. It should happen now, and the Gambia should be the first country to have such a negotiation. Now, what have we done with this idea? We went to the parliaments, we went to the governments. A lot of members of parliament of the governing party, the CDU, have spoken out in favor publicly. We went to the Ministry of Development. We said, listen, if you can reach an agreement like this with the Gambia, then you should make Gambia a priority country. We received the message that actually Gambia is too small for this, but if there is an agreement, it is possible. The alternative is terrible. The alternative is that you continue to have thousands, in fact tens of thousands of West Africans in Europe who cannot integrate, who have risked everything for no gain. Some of them will give up. Some of them will start selling drugs. And then the far right in Europe, which already exists, will say, see, these people have no right to stay. Look what they're doing. Why are they here? And a lot of parties all around Europe offering the far right alternative, which is to say, let's treat foreigners who have no right to stay, let's treat them so badly that they don't want to stay. This is fortunately not happening in Germany. In Germany it's the other side. You still have hundreds of individuals just in Baden-Württemberg that are providing voluntary work, that are helping Gambians, and they say, we are working with them, we don't want them to leave now. Actually, a lot of politicians are telling me that it would be popular to find a legal way for people to stay. The fear the Germans have is that if this then leads to more migration, it's a problem, and more people might die. But if you can say that this historic migration of the last few years, which has now come to a close, will now be replaced by legal routes that are opening, and in return those who are here become a bridge, then the vision for 2025 would be that one of your biggest diasporas in the world will actually be in Germany. Once we give up the idea that they will be deported, and more success stories emerge of people working, earning their money, sending money back to help their families, learning German, having skills, the image of the Gambia in Germany will change too. I presented this to so many media. It's all online. I can send you the articles. There was huge interest in the media around Europe, and I've never really had anyone say this is a bad idea, which is interesting because these are mass media. Recently in a leading weekly in Belgium, in French and Dutch. The goal, the vision should be that Germany becomes a privileged partner. We need to reverse the trend of declining legal mobility. And if this works, it should inspire other European countries to make the same with other African countries and with the Gambia. Now, what would it take concretely? It would take an honest debate where your government confidently goes to the Germans and says, listen, we will help you control future irregular migration in a legal way. We will say that from now on, we are prepared to take back those who cross irregularly, if you give up on the idea of returning those who are now in Germany. We want to then open legal migration, and we want you to be present here and become our strategic partner. If this is proposed now by the Gambian government, by your foreign ministry, by your president, by the parliament, and today I talked to the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee who was very supportive, then I guarantee you there is a possibility for this to work. Because there are enough people in Germany who see that the present mythology, the idea that you can deport thousands is crazy and will not happen. And the idea that you have tens of thousands of people with no legal stay in Europe at the margin of society is bad for everyone. Now, this report which we published, it's online. Here's our website. We called it the Gambia Plan. You will also see on our website a huge amount of media coverage. We will publish an update in the next few days, which if you leave me your email or give me your business card, I can send you as well. I'm looking forward to answer your questions, and I think the role of civil society in this and of the media is really crucial. If people realize that there are win-win solutions, if people see that this is transparently discussed and not a trick or not a betrayal, and if you see early next year thousands of Gambians in Germany say, we want this because then we can contribute, we can visit our families again and then go back, then the Gambia and Germany will show how you can, in a humane way, reduce irregular migration, stop loss of life, and create a new partnership. Thanks for